At my own dinner table with the plates still warm and the room full of that quiet that makes every word heavier. My daughter-in-law leaned back in her chair, looked straight into my eyes and said with a voice sharp enough to cut through bone, "You are just a walking credit card, not real family to us." And in that moment the air changed, because there are insults you can brush off, and there are insults that burn themselves into your ribs forever. And this one settled deep. I felt my son shift beside her, not in disagreement, but in silent agreement, and that was the part that hit harder than any words ever could. I'd given everything to this family after my wife passed, every dollar, every hour, every piece of myself. And yet there I was, a stranger at my own table, treated like a burden, like an outsider, like a tool. And as I sat there listening to the woman who married my son strip me of dignity, I realized something terrifying and freeing. At the same time, they believed I would stay. They believed I needed them. They believed they could say anything, do anything, and still count on me to show up, pay up, and stay silent. So I did the one thing they never imagined. I stood up, quietly pushed my chair in, and walked away without anger, without raising my voice, without explaining a single thing. Because only silence can prepare someone for consequences they do not see coming, and what happened over the next few days will show you exactly how fast the world collapses when the man they thought they owned finally stops playing his part and lets them feel the fallout of their own cruelty. My name is Walter Grayson. I am 69 years old, a retired insurance fraud investigator who spent 40 years uncovering lies for a living. After my wife Maggie passed away 2 years ago, I thought the hardest days of my life were behind me. I was wrong. The evening it all began was supposed to be a celebration. Tyler, my only son, had closed a major deal at work, and his wife Vanessa insisted on dinner at one of those upscale restaurants downtown where the menus don't have prices and the waiters look at you like you're interrupting their evening. I didn't want to go. Crowds exhaust me now, and sitting across from Vanessa has never been comfortable. But Tyler asked, and I have never been able to say no to my son. Since Maggie died, I've done everything I could to keep our family together. I paid off Tyler's mortgage when he fell behind. I covered Vanessa's credit cards when her spending spiraled out of control. I made the car payments, the insurance premiums, the property taxes. I told myself it was what any father would do. Maggie used to warn me about this. She had a gift for reading people, a quiet intuition that rarely failed her. She never liked Vanessa, not from the first dinner, not at the wedding, not in the years that followed. But I didn't listen. I wanted to believe my son had found happiness, and I let that hope blind me to what my wife could see so clearly. The restaurant was crowded when we arrived. Tyler had invited several of his business colleagues, men and women in expensive suits, who smiled too wide and laughed too loud. Vanessa seated me at the far end of the table, away from the conversation, as if I were an afterthought. I didn't complain. I've learned that silence is easier than conflict. The meal dragged on. Vanessa ordered the most expensive wine on the menu, then sent it back twice before accepting the third bottle. She spoke over me when I tried to join the conversation, corrected me when I mispronounced a dish, and rolled her eyes when I asked the waiter to repeat the specials. Tyler said nothing. He stared at his plate, cutting his steak into smaller and smaller pieces, avoiding my eyes. When the bill arrived, Vanessa slid it across the table toward me without a word. I glanced at the total and felt my chest tighten. Nearly $800 for a dinner I hadn't wanted to attend. I reached for my wallet, and that's when she said it. "You're just a walking credit card, Walter, not real family to us." The table went quiet. Tyler's colleagues looked away, suddenly fascinated by their napkins. Tyler himself said nothing. He didn't defend me. He didn't even look up. I set my credit card on the bill. I signed my name. And then I stood slowly, carefully feeling every one of my 69 years in my knees. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I simply looked at Vanessa, then at my son, and walked out of that restaurant with my dignity intact. The night air hit me like cold water. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, steadying my breath, when I noticed a figure across the street. Eleanor Hill. My neighbor was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Worry, perhaps? Or recognition? She raised her hand slightly as if to wave, but I turned away before she could. I wasn't ready to explain what had just happened. I drove home in silence, the city lights blurring past my windows. At a red light, I opened the glove compartment to find my reading glasses, and that's when I saw it. An envelope yellowed with age tucked behind the owner's manual. Maggie's handwriting was unmistakable, those graceful loops she'd perfected as a schoolteacher. My name was written across the front. The seal had never been broken. I remembered now. Jonathan Pierce, our family lawyer, had given me this envelope the week after Maggie's funeral. He said she'd left instructions for him to deliver it when I was ready. I'd shoved it into the glove compartment and never looked at it again. I wasn't ready then. Grief had made me a coward. I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine. The house was dark. The envelope sat in my hands heavier than paper should feel. Tonight, for the first time in 2 years, I was ready to open it. I did not sleep that night. The envelope sat on my kitchen table untouched while I paced the floor and watched the darkness give way to dawn. Part of me was afraid to open it. Maggie had been gone for 2 years and her voice had faded from my memory in ways that terrified me. I could no longer recall exactly how she laughed or the precise rhythm of her footsteps on the stairs. Opening that letter meant hearing her again, and I wasn't sure my heart could survive the reunion. But by Sunday morning, I'd run out of excuses. I made a pot of coffee, sat at the table where we had shared 41 years of breakfasts, and carefully broke the seal. Her handwriting filled the page, steady and deliberate, the same script that had graded thousands of student essays over her teaching career. I could almost see her sitting at this very table, pen in hand, choosing each word with the precision she brought to everything. "My dearest Walter," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then she has finally shown her true face. I prayed this day would never come, but I knew in my heart that it would. I saw Vanessa's nature from the wedding day, the way she looked at our home, our savings, our son. She did not see a family. She saw an opportunity. I wanted to tell you then, but I couldn't bear to divide what we had built, so instead, I prepared." I set the letter down and pressed my palm against my chest. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Maggie had known. All those years, through every dinner, every holiday, every forced smile, she had known exactly what Vanessa was. And she had said nothing because she loved me too much to break my heart. I continued reading. "I have done everything I can to protect you. The house Tyler lives in, the accounts, the investments, they are all structured to remain under your control. Jonathan has all the documents. Call him Walter. He will explain everything. And please do not let guilt weaken you. You gave them more than they deserved. It is time to protect yourself." There was one more paragraph, and this one puzzled me. "Eleanor will help you. She has been my closest friend for 40 years, and I made her promise to watch over you when I was gone. You may not have noticed her presence, but she has been there waiting for the moment you would need her. Trust her, Walter. She knows things about Vanessa that I could not put in writing." I read that passage 3 times. Eleanor Hill. My neighbor, the quiet woman who waved from her garden and occasionally brought over casseroles after Maggie died. I had never thought of her as anything more than a kind acquaintance. But Maggie had called her a best friend of 40 years. How had I missed that? I folded the letter carefully and reached for my phone. Jonathan Pierce answered on the second ring, as if he had been waiting for this call. "Walter," he said, "I was wondering when I would hear from you." "You knew about the letter," I said. "It was not a question. Maggie gave it to me 6 months before she passed. She made me promise to deliver it only when you were ready." He paused. "I take it something has happened." I told him about the dinner, about Vanessa's words, about Tyler's silence. Jonathan listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he exhaled slowly. "Then it's time," he said. "Maggie established a revocable living trust 3 years ago. Everything of value, the house Tyler and Vanessa live in, your investment accounts, the rental property in Richmond is held in that trust. You are the sole trustee. Tyler was granted conditional use rights to the house, but those rights can be revoked if he participates in financial abuse or fraud against you." "Financial abuse," I repeated. The words felt strange in my mouth. "That's exactly what this is, Walter. You've been paying their mortgage, their credit cards, their car loans, 17 separate monthly payments totaling over $8,000. They've been living off your generosity while treating you like a burden." I closed my eyes. 17 payments. I had never added them up before, never allowed myself to see the full picture. But Jonathan had. And so had Maggie. "What do I do?" I asked. "You take back control," he said. "Freeze the supplementary credit cards. Cancel the automatic payments. Every single one of them is tied to accounts where you are the primary owner. Legally, you have every right to stop them immediately." I spent the next 2 hours on the phone with banks and credit card companies. I spoke to representatives who called me sir and asked security questions only I could answer. One by one, I shut down the financial lifelines that had kept Tyler and Vanessa afloat. It was not revenge. It was correction. For 2 years, I had been a source of income. Today, I became a person again. When I finished, I sat in the silence of my kitchen and reread Maggie's letter one more time. She had seen this coming. She had prepared for it, and even from beyond the grave, she was still protecting me. The next morning, Vanessa stood at the counter of a luxury boutique downtown, holding a silk blouse that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. She handed her credit card to the cashier with the easy confidence of someone who had never been told no. The cashier swiped the card, frowned, and swiped it again. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said. "This card has been declined." Vanessa's smile froze. "That's impossible. Run it again." The cashier shook her head. "I've tried twice. Perhaps you have another form of payment." Before Vanessa could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and the color drained from her face. The notification was from the bank, clear and unmistakable. Primary account owner Walter Grayson, card privileges suspended. The humiliation at the boutique was only the beginning. By the time Vanessa returned home that afternoon, her hands were still trembling and her mind was racing through possibilities. A banking error, a temporary freeze, a misunderstanding that could be resolved with a single phone call. She refused to believe that Walter, the quiet old man she had dismissed for years, could have done this deliberately. But when she called the bank, the representative confirmed what the notification had already told her. The credit cards she had been using were supplementary cards tied to accounts owned by Walter Grayson. He had revoked her access. All of it, every card, every account, every financial privilege she had taken for granted. Vanessa sat at her kitchen table and stared at the wall. For 8 years, she had lived in this house, decorated every room, hosted dinner parties, and told her friends how lucky she was to have married into such a comfortable life. She had never once questioned where the money came from. Tyler's salary was modest, barely enough to cover groceries and utilities. The mortgage, the car payments, the credit cards, she had assumed Tyler was handling them. She had never asked. She had never wanted to know. Now, she needed to know everything. She spent the next 2 hours online searching public property records with the desperate focus of someone watching their world collapse. The results made her sick. The house she had called home for 8 years was not in Tyler's name. It had never been. The property was held in something called the Grayson Family Living Trust, with Walter listed as the sole trustee. Tyler's name appeared only in a secondary document, a rider that granted him conditional occupancy rights, subject to the trustee's ongoing approval. Conditional. The word burned in her throat. She had been living in Walter's house this entire time, and she had treated him like an unwelcome guest. Vanessa's panic deepened as she remembered the dinner, the things she had said, the tone she had used. She had called him a walking credit card in front of witnesses. She had mocked him, dismissed him, made him feel small and worthless. And the restaurant had security cameras. She drove back downtown that evening and spoke to the manager, claiming she needed the footage for an insurance matter. He was reluctant at first, but Vanessa could be persuasive when she needed to be. 20 minutes later, she sat in the back office watching the recording on a small monitor. The footage was clear. Too clear. Every word she had spoken was audible, captured by the microphone embedded in the security system. She watched herself slide the bill toward Walter, watched her lips form the words that now felt like a confession. Virginia was a one-party consent state, which meant anyone present at that dinner could have legally recorded the conversation. If Walter had a copy of this footage, or if he obtained one from the restaurant, it could be used against her in court. She had created evidence of her own cruelty, and she had done it in high definition. When Vanessa returned home, Tyler was waiting in the living room, his face pale with confusion. He had spent the day fielding calls from credit card companies and auto lenders, learning one by one that his father had canceled every payment that had kept their lives running smoothly. "What's happening?" he asked. "Why would Dad do this?" Before Vanessa could answer, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach drop. The number was unlisted, but she recognized it immediately. She had been dreading this call for weeks. "I need to take this," she said, stepping into the hallway. The voice on the other end was cold and familiar. "The money didn't come this month." Vanessa pressed the phone tighter against her ear, lowering her voice to a whisper. "I know." Something happened. The accounts were frozen. That's not my problem. We had an agreement. I'm trying, Mom, Vanessa's voice cracked. I just need more time, a few weeks, maybe a month. I can fix this. You said that last time. I'm running out of patience. Please, I'll figure something out. I always do. There was a long pause on the other end. When the voice returned, it was sharper, more dangerous. You have 2 weeks. Don't disappoint me again. The line went dead. Vanessa stood in the hallway, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. She had kept this part of her life hidden from Tyler for their entire marriage. The monthly payments, the threats, the weight of a debt she could never fully explain. Tyler appeared in the doorway. Who is that? Wrong number, Vanessa said quickly, forcing a smile that felt brittle on her face. He studied her for a moment, unconvinced, but said nothing. Vanessa walked past him into the living room and sank onto the couch. Her mind was already shifting, calculating, searching for a way out. Apologizing to Walter would mean admitting weakness. It would mean surrendering control. And she had spent too many years fighting for control to give it up now. We need to do something, she said finally. Your father is trying to destroy us. We have to destroy him first. Tyler stared at her. Vanessa, he's my father. And he just cut off everything we have, the house, the money, all of it. Do you want to lose everything? Tyler looked away, and Vanessa knew she had him. He was weak. He had always been weak. And weakness she had learned long ago could be shaped into obedience. But as she sat in the fading light of the living room, Vanessa could still hear her mother's voice echoing in her mind. 2 weeks. The clock was already ticking, and the woman who had controlled her since childhood was already planning the next move. I knew Vanessa would not retreat quietly. In my 40 years of investigating fraud, I learned that cornered people rarely surrender. They attack. They escalate. They convince themselves that aggression is the only path forward. So when Jonathan Pierce called me the morning after I froze the accounts, I told him to be ready. Something was coming, and I wanted a witness. The first wave arrived through phone calls. My sister in Richmond called to ask if everything was all right. An old colleague from my insurance days reached out with concern. Even my dentist's receptionist mentioned that someone had been asking questions about my mental state. Vanessa was working the phones, planting seeds of doubt, suggesting to anyone who would listen that Walter Grayson was losing his mind. I heard the rumors secondhand, that I had become paranoid, that I was hoarding money and refusing to help my own son, that I had threatened Vanessa and made her fear for her safety. Each lie was carefully crafted to paint me as a villain and her as a victim. She was building a narrative, and she was doing it with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. Tyler called me once during those days, his voice strained and uncomfortable. Vanessa was in the background, I could tell. He asked if we could talk, if there was some way to resolve this misunderstanding. I told him my door was always open. He said he would try to come by, but I heard Vanessa's sharp whisper before he hung up. He did not call again. On the 5th day they came to my house. I was in the garden when their car pulled into my driveway. Vanessa stepped out first, her face set in a mask of righteous fury. Tyler followed slowly, his shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the ground. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. Walter. Vanessa's voice cut through the morning air. We need to talk, now. I set down my gardening gloves and walked toward them. I had prepared for this moment. Jonathan Pierce was parked 3 houses down, his phone already recording through his windshield. Virginia law allowed one-party consent, which meant I only needed one person present to agree to the recording. That person was me. Vanessa did not wait for me to reach the driveway. She marched across my lawn, her heels sinking into the grass, and stopped inches from my face. You think you can do this to us? She hissed. You think you can cut us off and walk away? I think I can do whatever I want with my own money, I replied calmly. Your money. She laughed a sharp and bitter sound. We've been carrying you for years, inviting you to dinners, letting you pretend you're still part of this family, and this is how you repay us. I said nothing. I had learned long ago that silence was the most powerful weapon against people who needed an audience. Vanessa wanted me to argue, to shout, to give her ammunition. I refused, but my silence only enraged her further. She turned toward the street where several neighbors had paused to watch the commotion and raised her voice for their benefit. This man is senile, she announced. He's mentally unfit to manage his own affairs. He's paranoid, delusional, and dangerous. I'm filing for guardianship to protect him from himself. The neighbors stared. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed curious. Eleanor Hill stood on her porch across the street, her expression unreadable. "Vanessa," Tyler said quietly, "maybe we should go." "No." She spun back toward me. "He needs to hear this. Everyone needs to hear this. You can't treat people like garbage and expect no consequences, Walter. You're going to regret this." I met her gaze without flinching. "Are you finished?" For a moment she seemed lost for words. Then she turned and stormed back toward the car, dragging Tyler by the arm. But Tyler hesitated. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in years, something between guilt and grief. "Dad," he said quietly, 3 years ago I wrote you a letter. I tried to tell you something important, but you never responded." I frowned. "I never received any letter from you, son." Tyler's face flickered with old pain, a wound that had clearly never healed. It came back to me. "Return to sender. I thought you just didn't want to hear what I had to say." Before I could respond, Vanessa's voice cut through the air. "Tyler, now—" He turned and walked away, climbing into the passenger seat without looking back. The car pulled out of my driveway and disappeared down the street, leaving me standing alone on my lawn with more questions than answers. A letter. 3 years ago. I had never seen it, never held it, never read a single word. But Tyler believed I'd rejected him. Someone had made sure that letter never reached me, and I had a growing suspicion about who that someone might be. That evening, Jonathan Pierce called. "I recorded everything," he said. "Her threats, her accusations, her exact words. The guardianship claim, the public humiliation, all of it. She just handed us the entire case." I sat in my kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear, and allowed myself a small smile. "Good," I said, "because I think we're just getting started." The recording Jonathan had captured was valuable, but it was only one piece of a larger puzzle. Vanessa's outburst on my lawn had revealed her desperation, and desperate people always leave trails. I had spent 40 years following those trails, and I knew exactly where to start looking. 3 days after the confrontation, I drove downtown to meet with Emily Carter. She was a senior accounts manager at the bank where I had kept my money for over 30 years. We had spoken briefly when I called to freeze the supplementary cards, and something in her voice had told me she understood more than she was saying. When I asked if she could provide detailed statements of all transactions made on accounts connected to my name, she agreed without hesitation. Her office was small, but organized, the desk covered with neatly stacked folders and a computer screen angled away from the door. She closed the blinds before handing me a thick envelope. "Everything from the past 3 years," she said. I highlighted the transactions that seemed unusual, but honestly there were so many I stopped counting. I thanked her and began reviewing the statements. The numbers told a story that words never could. Vanessa had been spending aggressively, that much was obvious. Designer clothing, spa treatments, jewelry, electronics. But those expenses were not what caught my attention. Hidden among the luxury purchases were a series of transfers labeled as household expenses. Utility payments, maintenance fees, insurance premiums, ordinary categories that most people would never question. But I was not most people. I pulled a pen from my pocket and began circling entries. The amounts were too consistent, too round. $4,000 on the 15th of every month transferred to an external account under the name Gloria Marsh. The same amount, the same date for 36 consecutive months. Emily watched me work, her expression shifting from curiosity to something closer to admiration. "How do you know what to look for?" she asked. "Most people wouldn't notice those patterns. They'd just see household expenses and move on." I looked up from the statements and allowed myself a small smile. 15 years as an insurance fraud investigator before I retired. I spent my career uncovering schemes just like this. People think they're clever, hiding money in plain sight, disguising transfers as ordinary bills. But the patterns are always there if you know how to read them. Emily leaned forward, her voice dropping. "So you've done this before?" "Hundreds of times," I said. "I've exposed embezzlers, con artists, and family members who thought they could steal from their own relatives without consequence. Vanessa is just homework." The word landed between us with quiet confidence. Emily nodded slowly, a new respect in her eyes. "Mr. Grayson, I have to be honest with you. When I first saw these statements, I thought it was just reckless spending. But this pattern you've identified, the monthly transfers to this Gloria Marsh, it suggests something more systematic. This isn't someone who can't control her shopping habits. This is someone moving money deliberately, consistently, over a long period of time. Systematic financial fraud, I said. Exactly. Emily pointed to the highlighted entries. Whoever Gloria Marsh is, Vanessa has been paying her like clockwork, $4,000 a month for 3 years. That's nearly $150,000 total, and it's all been coming from accounts tied to your name. I set the statements down and stared at the name. Gloria Marsh. I'd never heard it before. Vanessa had never mentioned anyone by that name, not in 8 years of family dinners and holiday gatherings. Yet she had been funneling my money to this person without hesitation, without explanation, without a single moment of guilt. Can you trace the receiving account? I asked. Emily shook her head. It's at a different institution. I can give you the routing number, but you'd need legal authority or law enforcement to access the details. She paused. Or someone with your particular skill set. I folded the statements and slipped them into my jacket pocket. I appreciate your help, Emily, more than you know. She walked me to the door but stopped before opening it. Mr. Grayson, can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you see this sooner? With your background, your experience, you could have spotted these patterns years ago. It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. Because I trusted my son, I said. And I wanted to believe that his wife was worthy of that trust. I stopped looking because I was afraid of what I might find. Emily nodded, her expression softening. Well, you're looking now. That's what matters. I thanked her again and walked out into the afternoon sun. The streets were busy with people rushing to meetings and appointments, living their ordinary lives without suspicion or fear. I had been one of them once. Now I was something else, a hunter who had finally picked up the scent. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the statements spread before me. I had already begun my research, running the name Gloria Marsh through every database I still had access to. Public records, court filings, property registrations. The pieces were scattered, but I knew how to assemble them. Gloria Marsh, $4,000 every month, $150,000 in total. Who was this woman? A blackmailer? A creditor? A ghost from Vanessa's past that she had been feeding in secret? I did not have the answers yet. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever Vanessa was hiding, it was bigger than greed, and I was going to find out exactly what it was. The name Gloria Marsh led me down a path I had not expected. I spent the next 3 days buried in research, using every skill I had developed over 4 decades of fraud investigation. Public records, court databases, archived newspaper articles. The trail was cold but not invisible. People who commit crimes always leave traces. They believe time erases their sins, but time only buries them. With enough patience, you can always dig them up. Gloria Marsh was not a stranger. She was Vanessa's mother. The connection became clear when I found a marriage certificate from 23 years ago, filed in a small county in West Virginia. Gloria Marsh had married a man named David Holloway, and together they had 2 children. The first was a son born in 1985. The second was a daughter born in 1989, whose name matched the woman who had married my son 8 years ago. Vanessa had never spoken about her family. Whenever Tyler asked about her parents, she changed the subject or offered vague explanations about estrangement. I had assumed it was simply a painful topic, a wound too deep to discuss. Now I understood why she had worked so hard to keep her past hidden. Gloria Marsh had a criminal record. The conviction was 20 years old, filed in a county court in Ohio. Financial fraud, specifically a scheme involving falsified insurance claims and forged documents. She had stolen nearly $200,000 from elderly clients before being caught. The judge sentenced her to 3 years, of which she served 18 months before being released on parole. After that, she vanished from public records entirely. No address, no employment history, no tax filings. She had become a ghost surviving on the edges of society. But ghosts still need money. I continued digging and found the son Vanessa's older brother. His record was different, but equally troubling. Multiple arrests for drug possession, 3 stints in rehabilitation facilities, 1 conviction for petty theft. The pattern was clear. He was an addict who had never found his footing, cycling through recovery and relapse for most of his adult life. The monthly payments Vanessa had been making suddenly made terrible sense. $4,000 every month was not going to a mysterious creditor or a secret account. It was going to her mother, who was using the money to support herself and her troubled son. Vanessa was not just spending recklessly, she was being bled dry by her own family. I sat back in my chair and stared at the documents spread across my table. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt something other than anger. I felt pity. Vanessa was not the monster I had imagined. She was a woman trapped between two worlds, one she had built with Tyler and one she could never escape. Her mother had taught her how to manipulate, how to take, how to survive by exploiting others. And now that same mother was exploiting her, demanding money that Vanessa could only obtain by draining my accounts. But pity did not excuse what she had done. Vanessa had choices. She could have told Tyler the truth. She could have asked for help. She could have cut ties with her mother and built an honest life. Instead, she had chosen to treat me like an AT, to humiliate me in public, to threaten me with guardianship when I tried to reclaim my own money. Whatever circumstances had shaped her, she was still responsible for her actions. I decided to keep digging. The picture was becoming clearer, but I needed more evidence before I could decide what to do with it. 2 days later, I found something that changed everything. Buried in the bank statements was a recurring payment I had initially overlooked. It was smaller than the others, only $800 a month, and it was labeled as a storage rental. But when I traced the address, I discovered it was not a storage facility. It was an apartment complex on the outskirts of the city, a modest building in a neighborhood I had never visited. I drove there the following afternoon. The building manager was a tired woman in her 50s who seemed unsurprised when I asked about the tenant in Unit 4B. She confirmed that a woman matching Vanessa's description had rented the apartment 6 months ago, paying in cash and using a name I did not recognize. She comes by a few times a week, the manager said, usually stays an hour or two. Sometimes she brings groceries. Sometimes a man comes with her. A man. My chest tightened at the words. Can you describe him? I asked. Thin, pale, looks like he hasn't slept in weeks. I figured he was a relative or something. They don't act like a couple. I thanked her and returned to my car, my mind racing with possibilities. The obvious conclusion was infidelity, a secret lover hidden away from Tyler's eyes. But something about the description did not fit. Thin, pale, hasn't slept in weeks. That did not sound like a romantic partner. It sounded like someone struggling with illness or addiction. I sat in my car and watched the building for another hour. Just before sunset, a familiar car pulled into the parking lot. Vanessa stepped out carrying 2 bags of groceries. She walked quickly to Unit 4B, glanced over her shoulder, and disappeared inside. 20 minutes later, she emerged alone and drove away without looking back. The man in that apartment was not her lover. I was almost certain of it now. But if he was who I suspected, then the truth was far more complicated than a simple affair. Vanessa was hiding something much bigger, and I was determined to find out exactly what it was. I returned to the apartment complex the following morning, this time with a clearer purpose. The building manager remembered me from the day before and seemed almost relieved when I explained that I was investigating a family matter, not pursuing anything criminal. She led me to a small office behind the front desk where an outdated security system hummed quietly in the corner. We keep footage for 30 days, she said, pulling up files on a dusty monitor. The owner installed these cameras after some break-ins a few years back. Most tenants don't even know they're there. I watched as she navigated through the archive, selecting dates at random from the past month. The footage was grainy but clear enough to confirm what I had suspected. Vanessa appeared on screen again and again, always carrying bags. Groceries, pharmacy packages, envelopes that looked thick enough to contain cash. She never stayed long, usually 45 minutes to an hour, and she always left alone. What about the man? I asked. The one you mentioned lives in the unit. The manager scrolled to a different angle, one that captured the hallway outside Unit 4B. A thin figure emerged from the door, his face gaunt and shadowed. He moved slowly like someone recovering from a long illness and leaned against the wall for support before retreating back inside. I studied his features carefully, the shape of his jaw, the way he carried himself, even the nervous habit of running a hand through his thinning hair. He looked like a man who had been fighting a battle for years and was losing. Does he ever leave the building? I asked. Rarely. Maybe once a week for a walk around the block. He keeps to himself, doesn't cause trouble. I thanked her for her time and left the building with a heavy weight in my chest. The pieces had finally come together, and the picture they formed was more tragic than I had anticipated. The man was not Vanessa's lover. He was her brother. I had found his records during my earlier research: multiple drug arrests, failed rehabilitation attempts, a life defined by addiction and disappointment. Gloria had been using him as leverage, forcing Vanessa to pay for his housing, his treatment, his survival. The monthly transfers were not voluntary generosity. They were ransom payments extracted through guilt and the threat of exposure. Vanessa had hidden her family from Tyler because she was ashamed. She had built a new identity, a polished exterior that concealed the dysfunction she had grown up with. But her mother had never let her escape. Gloria knew exactly how to manipulate her daughter, how to pull the strings that kept the money flowing. And Vanessa, trapped between her past and her present, had chosen to steal from my family rather than reveal the truth to her husband. I sat in my car for a long time, watching the apartment building fade in my rearview mirror. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, to see Vanessa as purely villainous, deserving of every consequence I could deliver. But the truth was more complicated. She was both perpetrator and victim, a woman who had made terrible choices while being crushed by circumstances she could not control. That did not excuse what she had done. She had humiliated me in public. She had threatened to have me declared incompetent. She had stolen nearly $150,000 from accounts that bore my name. Whatever pain her family had caused her, she had chosen to pass that pain on to me instead of confronting it honestly. I made a decision in that parking lot. Vanessa would face consequences for her actions. I would not protect her from the legal and financial reckoning that was coming, but I would not destroy her completely. I would not expose her brother to Tyler or drag her family's secrets into public view. Justice did not require cruelty, and I had no interest in becoming the monster she had tried to make me. The drive home was quiet. I turned off the radio and let the silence settle around me, processing everything I had learned. Maggie had seen through Vanessa from the beginning, but even she might not have known the full depth of what lay beneath the surface. Some secrets are buried so deep that even the people carrying them forget where the graves are. When I pulled into my driveway, my phone rang. Tyler's name appeared on the screen, and I answered immediately. "Dad?" His voice was strained, cracking at the edges. "Dad, I don't know what to do." "Tyler, what's wrong?" "Our bank account, it's negative, overdrawn by almost $3,000. I don't understand how this happened. I asked Vanessa, but she won't tell me anything. She just keeps saying it's your fault that you did this to us." I closed my eyes and gripped the steering wheel. My son sounded like a frightened child, lost and desperate for someone to guide him out of the darkness. "Tyler, listen to me. There are things you don't know, things Vanessa has been hiding from you for a very long time." "What are you talking about? What things?" I hesitated. This was not a conversation to have over the phone, not when emotions were running so high. But I could hear the fear in his voice, the same fear I had heard when he was a boy, waking from nightmares, calling for me to chase the monsters away. "Come to my house tomorrow," I said. "Alone. There's something I need to show you." The line was silent for a long moment. When Tyler finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Is it that bad?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to protect him the way I had always tried to protect him, but protection had become a prison, and the only way out was the truth. "Yes, son. It's that bad." Tyler didn't come the next day, or the day after. I waited by the phone, checking for messages that never arrived, wondering if Vanessa had somehow convinced him to stay away. But on the fourth day, everything changed. I learned later what had happened during those 72 hours, pieced together from Tyler's broken confessions and the evidence he brought with him. The story he told me was one of a man watching his entire life collapse brick by brick until nothing remained but rubble and regret. It began the morning after our phone call. Tyler had woken early, determined to confront Vanessa about the overdrawn account. He found her in the kitchen, already dressed, her face set in the cold mask she wore when preparing for battle. "We need to talk about the money," he said. Vanessa did not look up from her coffee. "There's nothing to talk about. Your father did this to us. He cut us off, froze the accounts, left us with nothing. This is his fault, not mine." "But the overdraft, the negative balance, where did the money go?" She finally met his eyes, and what Tyler saw there was not guilt or shame. It was calculation. The same expression she wore when negotiating a deal or maneuvering through a difficult conversation. "Your father betrayed our family," she said, her voice flat and final. "And now you have to choose, me or him. There's no middle ground anymore." Tyler told me later that he felt something break inside him at that moment. Not his heart, though, that was already fractured. Something deeper. The foundation of trust he had built his marriage upon the belief that Vanessa was his partner through everything. It crumbled like sand beneath a wave. He went to work that day in a daze. His performance had been slipping for weeks, distracted by the chaos at home, and his manager had noticed. The warning came in the form of a formal email copied to Human Resources, outlining concerns about missed deadlines and incomplete projects. If his performance did not improve within 30 days, further action would be taken. Tyler stared at the email for an hour without moving. Everything was falling apart. His marriage, his finances, his career. The life he had built so carefully was dissolving, and he could not find solid ground anywhere. That evening, he returned home to find Vanessa gone. A note on the counter said she was staying with a friend and would return when he was ready to be reasonable. Tyler did not know whether to feel relieved or abandoned. He poured himself a drink he did not finish and wandered through the empty house like a ghost. He ended up in the spare bedroom they used for storage, searching for financial documents that might explain what had happened to their money. He pulled boxes from closets, rifled through filing cabinets, desperate for any evidence that might make sense of the disaster. That was when he found the letter. It was buried at the bottom of a box labeled Old Correspondence, tucked beneath birthday cards and holiday letters from relatives. The envelope was addressed to me in Tyler's own handwriting, dated 3 years ago. Across the front, stamped in red ink, were the words, "Return to sender addressee unknown." Tyler told me he stared at that envelope for a long time, trying to understand what he was seeing. He remembered writing that letter. He remembered agonizing over every word, trying to find a way to warn me about Vanessa without destroying his marriage. He had mailed it himself, dropped it into the blue box on the corner of his street, and waited for a response that never came. When the letter returned a week later marked as undeliverable, Tyler had assumed I had moved without telling him, or that the post office had made an error. He never considered another possibility. He never thought to question. But now, holding the envelope in his trembling hands, he saw something he had missed before. The handwriting on the return label was not the mechanical print of a postal worker. It was handwritten. And the loops of the letters, the slight tilt of the words, were unmistakably familiar. It was Vanessa's handwriting. She had intercepted the letter before it ever left the house. She had written a fake return label, made it look like the address was wrong, and placed it back in the mailbox for Tyler to find. He had believed his father rejected him. He had carried that wound for 3 years, convinced that I had chosen silence over my own son. But I had never seen the letter at all. Tyler drove to my house that night through rain that blurred the streetlights into streaks of gold. He didn't call ahead. He did not warn me he was coming. He simply appeared on my doorstep, soaked and shaking, the old envelope clutched against his chest like a lifeline. I opened the door and saw my son standing there, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the rain until I could not tell where one ended and the other began. "Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Dad, I tried to warn you about her 3 years ago. I wrote you a letter. I told you everything I was afraid of, but it came back. It never reached you." He held out the envelope, his hands trembling so violently that the paper rattled in the silence. "Did you ever know I tried?" he asked. "Did you ever know I was trying to protect you?" I looked at my son, broken and desperate, holding the proof of a betrayal neither of us had imagined. And I realized that Vanessa had stolen more than money. She had stolen 3 years of trust between a father and his son. I pulled Tyler inside and closed the door against the rain. He was shivering not just from the cold, but from something deeper, a tremor that came from the soul rather than the skin. I guided him to the kitchen table, the same table where Maggie and I had shared 1,000 meals, and sat him down in the chair that had always been his. "Let me see the letter," I said gently. He handed it over with the care of someone surrendering a sacred object. The envelope was worn from handling, the edges soft and faded. I recognized Tyler's handwriting immediately, the same careful script he had developed in grade school and never changed. The return label was different. The loops were tighter, more controlled, written by someone who had practiced deception until it became second nature. Vanessa's handwriting. I was certain of it now. I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The pages were dated 3 years ago, written in ink that had faded slightly with time. Tyler watched me read, his eyes red and swollen, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "Dear Dad," the letter began, I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to write it and hope you understand. I'm worried about my marriage. I'm worried about Vanessa. She's not the person I thought she was when we got married, and I don't know what to do." The letter continued for 2 pages, detailing concerns that Tyler had never voiced aloud. Vanessa's controlling behavior, her obsession with money and status. The way she manipulated conversations, twisted words, made him feel guilty for questioning anything. He wrote about feeling trapped, isolated from friends and family, unsure whether his perceptions were real or imagined. "I know you and Mom never liked her," Tyler had written, "but I was too proud to admit you might have been right. I'm not too proud anymore. I just need someone to talk to. Please, Dad, I need your help." I set the letter down and looked at my son. He was staring at the table, unable to meet my eyes, shame radiating from every line of his body. "I thought you ignored me," he whispered. "When the letter came back, I thought you didn't want to hear it. I thought you were angry that I was criticizing your daughter-in-law. I've been carrying that rejection for 3 years, Dad. 3 years of thinking you chose silence over your own son." My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. 3 years. For 3 years, Tyler had believed I had abandoned him in his moment of greatest need. He had suffered alone, convinced that his own father had turned away when he reached out for help. And all because Vanessa had intercepted a letter and returned it with a forged label. "Tyler." My voice broke on his name. "I never saw this letter. I never knew you wrote it. If I had known if I had received even one word of this, everything would have been different." He finally looked up, his eyes filled with a pain that cut me deeper than any insult Vanessa had ever delivered. "I wanted to try again," he said. "I wanted to call you to visit to explain everything in person, but every time I tried, Vanessa was there. She had an excuse, a reason, a way to make me feel like I was overreacting. And after the letter came back, I didn't have the courage to try again. I thought you had already made your choice." I stood and walked around the table. Tyler rose to meet me, and I pulled him into an embrace that I should have given him years ago. He collapsed against me, his shoulders shaking with sobs he had been holding back for far too long. "I'm sorry," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I didn't see the signs. I'm sorry I let my hope for your happiness blind me to what was happening. I failed you, Tyler. As a father, I failed you." He shook his head against my shoulder. "No, Dad. I failed myself. I was weak. I let her control me because I was afraid of being alone. I should have been stronger. I should have fought harder. We both made mistakes," I said. "But we're here now. That's what matters." We stood like that for a long time, 2 broken men holding each other together. When we finally separated, I led him back to the table and poured us both coffee that neither of us would drink. "There's something you need to know," I said, "about Vanessa, about her family." Tyler looked at me with exhausted eyes. "What do you mean?" I told him everything I had discovered. Gloria Marsh, the mother with a criminal record, the brother struggling with addiction in a hidden apartment, the monthly payments that had drained my accounts for years. I explained how Vanessa had been caught between 2 worlds, exploited by her own mother while exploiting us in turn. "I'm not telling you this to excuse what she did," I said carefully. "She made choices, terrible choices, and she has to face the consequences, but I want you to understand the full picture before you decide what to do next." Tyler absorbed the information in silence. I could see him processing, recalibrating, trying to reconcile the woman he had married with the secrets she had kept hidden. "She never told me any of this," he said finally. 8 years of marriage, and she never mentioned her mother, her brother, any of it. I thought her family was just estranged. I never imagined." "People hide their pasts for many reasons," I said. Some out of shame, some out of survival. But the hiding becomes its own kind of prison. Eventually the walls close in." Before Tyler could respond, the front door slammed open with a force that rattled the windows. Vanessa stood in the doorway, rain dripping from her coat, her face twisted with a fury I had never seen before. Her eyes swept the room, taking in Tyler's tear-stained face, the letter spread across the table, the closeness between father and son that she had worked so hard to destroy. "Your father ruined us!" she screamed, pointing at me with a trembling finger. "He cut off everything we had, left us with nothing, and now you're sitting here listening to his lies." Tyler stood slowly, his expression shifting from grief to something harder. Something I had never seen in my gentle son. "They're not lies, Vanessa," he said quietly, and we both know it. The confrontation in my kitchen ended without resolution. Tyler refused to leave with Vanessa, and she stormed out into the rain screaming threats that echoed through the empty street. He stayed the night in his old bedroom, the one Maggie had preserved exactly as he left it when he moved out for college. I checked on him twice before dawn, watching him sleep the fitful sleep of a man whose world had shattered. The next morning, the war went public. I discovered the first post while drinking my coffee. A neighbor had sent me a link with a concerned message asking if everything was all right. I clicked through to find Vanessa's social media page where she had written a lengthy account of what she called years of abuse at the hands of my father-in-law. The post painted me as a monster. According to Vanessa, I was controlling, manipulative, and mentally unstable. She claimed I had threatened her, repeatedly withheld money to punish her for imagined offenses, and ultimately thrown her out of the house at midnight during a thunderstorm. The story was complete fiction, but it was written with the emotional precision of someone who understood how to manipulate sympathy. The comments filled with outrage. Strangers called me names I will not repeat. Neighbors I had known for decades expressed shock and disappointment. Someone suggested I should be investigated for elder abuse, apparently missing the irony that I was the elder in this situation. The post had been shared dozens of times, spreading through networks I could not see, poisoning opinions I had no way to correct. Tyler saw the post and went pale. "Dad, this is insane. None of this happened." "I know," I said calmly. "But truth doesn't travel as fast as lies. We need to be patient." I was not as calm as I pretended. Seeing my reputation dismantled by fabrication stung more than I wanted to admit, but I had survived worse during my career. I had watched guilty people spin elaborate stories to escape consequences only to trip over their own contradictions eventually. Vanessa would make mistakes. She always did. The first offender appeared that afternoon. Eleanor Hill posted a response on Vanessa's page, polite but firm, questioning the accuracy of the claims. She mentioned that she had been my neighbor for 15 years and had never witnessed any behavior matching Vanessa's descriptions. She asked for evidence, for specifics, for anything beyond emotional accusations. Vanessa's response was vicious. She called Eleanor a senile old woman who was probably in love with me. She accused her of being part of a conspiracy to steal her home and destroy her marriage. She suggested that Eleanor's age had compromised her judgment and that she should stay out of matters she didn't understand. The attack was cruel, but it was also a mistake. Eleanor Hill was not a woman who retreated from confrontation. She appeared at my door that evening carrying a folder and wearing an expression I had never seen on her gentle face. There was steel in her eyes, the kind that comes from decades of watching and waiting. "May I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside and led her to the living room. Tyler had gone for a walk to clear his head, so we were alone. Eleanor sat on the edge of the couch and placed the folder on the coffee table between us. "Walter, there are things I need to tell you, things I probably should have said long ago." I waited, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. "Maggie and I met in college," Eleanor began. "Freshman year in a literature class neither of us wanted to take. We became friends immediately, the kind of friends who share everything. We stayed close for 40 years through marriages and children and all the complications life throws at you." I stared at her. "Maggie never mentioned how close you were." Eleanor smiled sadly. "She didn't want to burden you with her friendships. You had your work, your investigations, your own world. She and I had ours. We talked on the phone every week, sometimes more. She told me everything, Walter, including her concerns about Vanessa." The revelation settled over me like a blanket I hadn't known I needed. All those years, Maggie had maintained a friendship. I knew nothing about a confidant who understood her fears and frustrations. "Before she died," Eleanor continued, "Maggie made me promise something. She said that if anything ever happened to you, if Vanessa ever showed her true nature, I was to step in and help however I could. She knew this day might come. She prepared for it." "That's why you've been watching," I said quietly. "The worried looks, the waves from across the street. You were waiting." "For 2 years," Eleanor confirmed, "waiting for the moment you would need me. That moment is now." She opened the folder and handed me her phone. The screen showed a series of screenshots, text messages between Vanessa and someone named Rachel. "A mutual friend forwarded these to me last week," Eleanor explained. She was uncomfortable with what Vanessa was saying and thought someone should know. I scrolled through the messages, my stomach tightening with each word. They were dated 6 months ago, long before the dinner, long before any of this began. The old man is getting weaker, Vanessa had written. It's only a matter of time before we can push him out completely. Tyler won't fight me on it. He never does. Another message read, "Once Walter is gone, the house is ours. I've already checked the property records. We just need to wait for the right moment." I looked up at Eleanor, the phone heavy in my hands. "She's been planning this all along," Eleanor said softly. "This wasn't a reaction to what you did, Walter. It was always the plan. Your wife knew. That's why she left instructions." The screenshots Eleanor showed me confirmed what I had suspected for weeks. Vanessa's campaign against me was not a desperate reaction to losing financial support. It was a calculated strategy planned months in advance, waiting only for the right trigger to set it in motion. I had provided that trigger when I froze the accounts, but the attack would have come eventually regardless. She had always intended to push me out. I simply accelerated her timeline. 3 days after Eleanor's visit, Vanessa escalated beyond social media posts. She released a video. I didn't see it immediately. Tyler found it first, his face going white as he watched on his phone. He handed it to me without a word, and I pressed play with the resignation of a man about to witness his own execution. The footage was from the restaurant the night of the dinner that started everything. But it had been edited with surgical precision to tell a story that never happened. The video began mid-scene, cutting out the context of the evening. The insults Vanessa had delivered, the humiliation I had endured in silence. All that remained was my departure, my face grim and determined as I stood from the table and walked away without speaking. Vanessa had added narration, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. She described an evening of fear, claiming I had threatened her under my breath, that my silence was menacing rather than dignified. She called me unstable, dangerous, a man whose temper had terrorized her family for years. The video ended with a tearful plea for support, asking viewers to share her story so that other victims would know they were not alone. The video spread like fire through dry grass. Within 24 hours, it had accumulated over 50,000 views. Comments poured in, most of them hostile, many threatening. Strangers who had never met me declared me a monster. Armchair psychologists diagnosed me with conditions I could not pronounce. Someone created a hashtag calling for my arrest, though they never specified what crime I had committed. The hate mail began arriving the next day. Anonymous letters stuffed into my mailbox, some typed, some scrawled in angry handwriting. They called me names that would have made my grandfather blush. They suggested I should die alone, that I deserved whatever suffering came my way. One letter included a crude drawing of a man hanging from a tree, my name written beneath it in red ink. Tyler wanted to respond publicly. He wanted to post the truth to defend me in the same arena where Vanessa was attacking, but I stopped him. "Silence is not surrender," I told him. "Let her keep talking. The more she says, the more contradictions she creates. We will respond when the time is right, and we will respond with evidence, not emotions." Jonathan Pierce had been working behind the scenes since the day after Eleanor's visit. I had given him everything: the bank statements showing the fraudulent transfers, Tyler's intercepted letter with Vanessa's forged handwriting, Eleanor's screenshots of incriminating messages, and the recordings he had made of Vanessa's threats on my lawn. But we needed one more piece to complete the picture: the original restaurant footage. Jonathan knew something that Vanessa apparently did not. Virginia law required restaurants to retain security footage for a minimum of 90 days for insurance and liability purposes. The dinner had occurred only 5 weeks earlier, which meant the original recording still existed somewhere in the restaurant's system. He visited the restaurant personally, armed with a subpoena prepared by a judge who had reviewed our preliminary evidence. The manager was cooperative, perhaps sensing which way the wind was blowing. Within hours, Jonathan had a complete copy of the unedited footage showing the entire evening from beginning to end. I watched it with him in his office that afternoon. The difference was stark. Where Vanessa's edited version showed only my departure, the original captured the full context: her dismissive glances throughout the meal, the moment she slid the bill toward me with contempt, her voice clear and unmistakable, delivering the words that had broken something inside me: "You're just a walking credit card, not real family to us." The footage also showed Tyler's reaction, or rather his lack of one. His silence, his downcast eyes, his refusal to defend his own father. It was painful to watch, but it was necessary. Truth often is. Jonathan spread the documents across his conference table, arranging them like a general planning a battle. Financial records showing systematic fraud, the intercepted letter proving deliberate manipulation. screenshots demonstrating premeditated malice, audio recordings of public threats, and now video evidence that directly contradicted Vanessa's viral narrative. "This is everything we need," Jonathan said. "Financial fraud, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress. We can pursue civil action immediately. Criminal charges may follow depending on how the district attorney views the evidence." I studied the documents, each one representing a fragment of the truth that Vanessa had tried so hard to bury. She had gambled on my silence, on my unwillingness to fight back, on the assumption that an old man would simply accept defeat and fade away. She had miscalculated badly. "What about Tyler?" I asked. "If we file, he'll be caught in the middle." Jonathan nodded. "I've thought about that. We can structure the claims to focus on Vanessa's actions rather than the marriage itself. Tyler isn't the target. She is." I looked out the window at the city below, the ordinary people living their ordinary lives, unaware of the wars being fought in conference rooms like this one. Maggie had prepared for this moment. Eleanor had watched over me until I was ready. Tyler had finally found the courage to see the truth. All that remained was the final act. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. The message was brief, but it carried the weight of everything we had worked toward. "It's time, Walter. The truth is ready to speak. Tomorrow, we file everything." The morning we filed, the sky was gray and heavy with the promise of rain. Jonathan met me at the courthouse before 9, carrying a briefcase stuffed with documents that represented months of deception finally brought to light. We filed civil claims for fraud, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We submitted the unedited restaurant footage as evidence contradicting Vanessa's viral video. We included bank statements, intercepted letters, screenshots, and recordings. Every lie she had told was now preserved in official court records, but the legal filings were only the beginning. That afternoon, I made a decision I had been postponing for weeks. I activated the clause in the living trust that Maggie had designed precisely for a situation like this. The clause was simple but devastating. Tyler had been granted conditional occupancy rights to the house rights that remained valid only as long as he did not participate in financial fraud or abuse against the trustee. By allowing Vanessa to drain my accounts by remaining silent while she exploited my generosity, Tyler had violated those conditions. Jonathan prepared the eviction notice with the precision of a surgeon. Under Virginia law, occupants who violated the terms of a trust-based residency agreement could be required to vacate within 30 days. The notice was delivered by certified mail that same afternoon, addressed to both Tyler and Vanessa at the house I had purchased with Maggie 40 years ago. I did not enjoy signing those papers. Tyler was my son, and the thought of forcing him from his home brought me no pleasure. But the house had never been his. It had always been mine, held in trust, loaned to him under conditions he had failed to honor. Vanessa had corrupted that arrangement, and the only way to reclaim what was mine was to enforce the boundaries Maggie had so wisely established. The eviction notice was not the only blow to fall that day. Jonathan had coordinated with the banks to ensure that every account connected to my name was either frozen or closed. Credit cards that Vanessa had been using for years suddenly ceased to function. Automatic payments that had sustained her lifestyle were canceled without warning. The financial infrastructure she had built upon my generosity collapsed in a single afternoon. I learned later what happened when the notices arrived. Tyler called me that evening, his voice hollow and exhausted. "She's losing her mind, Dad." When the eviction notice came, she started screaming at me like it was my fault. She tried to use her credit cards to book a hotel, and every single one was declined. She doesn't have anything. Not a savings account, not a checking account, nothing in her own name. Everything was tied to you. I listened without interrupting. Tyler needed to speak to process the collapse of the life he had known for 8 years. "She kept asking me to do something," he continued. "She wanted me to call you, to beg, to threaten. I don't even know. She said I had to fix this, that I was the only one who could make you change your mind." "What did you tell her?" I asked quietly. There was a long pause before Tyler answered. When he spoke, his voice carried a strength I had not heard in years. "I told her the truth. I said she lied to me for 8 years. She stole my letter to you, the one where I tried to warn you about her. She made me believe my own father had abandoned me. I told her I have nothing left to give her. Nothing." The words hung between us, heavy with finality. Tyler had finally stopped defending his wife. He had stopped making excuses, stopped hoping things would improve, stopped sacrificing his own dignity on the altar of a broken marriage. For the first time since his wedding day, he was standing on his own. "I'm proud of you," I said. "That couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," he admitted. "But it was necessary. I should have said those things years ago." We talked for another hour about practical matters mostly. Tyler would need to find a new place to live. He would need to separate his finances from Vanessa's, assuming she had any finances left to separate. The road ahead would be difficult, but at least he would be walking it with clear eyes. I didn't learn about Vanessa's phone call until the next day, when Tyler recounted the scene he had witnessed. After he refused to help her, Vanessa had retreated to the bedroom and closed the door. Tyler heard her voice through the walls, frantic and pleading, speaking to someone on the phone. "Mom, he knows everything," she had cried. "The money, the apartment, everything. Walter found out about all of it. I don't know what to do." There was a pause as she listened to the response. Then her voice rose in desperation. "What do you mean I've done everything you asked? Every month for years I've sent you money. I've kept your secret. I've protected Marcus. You can't just abandon me now." Another pause. Tyler said he could hear the tinny sound of the voice on the other end, though he couldn't make out the words. Whatever was said made Vanessa go silent. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. Mom, please, I need your help." The response came through clearly enough for Tyler to hear, even through the closed door. Gloria Marsh's voice was cold and sharp, utterly devoid of maternal warmth. "Then you're no longer useful to me." The line went dead. Tyler heard something shatter against the wall, followed by a scream that sounded more animal than human. He didn't open the door. He simply walked out of the house, got in his car, and drove away. The woman who had controlled Vanessa for decades had finally cut her loose. And now, Vanessa was alone with no money, no allies, and nowhere left to hide. The call came 2 days after Gloria abandoned her daughter. Vanessa's voice was different now, stripped of its usual polish raw, with something that might have been desperation or rage or both. She demanded a meeting, insisting that we needed to talk face to face, that there were things I didn't understand, that she could explain everything if I would just give her 1 hour. I agreed. Not because I believed her, but because I knew what she was planning. She chose the location herself, the same upscale restaurant where she had humiliated me weeks earlier, the place where this entire war had begun. The choice was deliberate, calculated. She wanted to recreate the scene, to provoke me into an outburst she could capture on camera and spin into another viral accusation. She had learned nothing from her previous failures. Desperate people rarely do. Jonathan advised against going. He worried it was a trap, that anything I said could be twisted and used against me in court. But I had spent 40 years reading people who thought they were smarter than the system. Vanessa was unraveling, and unraveling people make mistakes. I intended to let her make as many as possible. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early and requested the same table where we had sat that fateful evening. The hostess recognized me and hesitated before leading me to the spot. News travels fast in places like this, and I suspected the staff had been following the drama playing out across their social media feeds. I ordered water and waited. Vanessa arrived exactly on time, dressed impeccably despite the chaos of her life. She had always understood the power of appearances, the way a confident exterior could mask interior collapse. But her eyes betrayed her. They were red-rimmed and wild, darting around the room as if searching for threats in every corner. She sat across from me without greeting and placed her phone face up on the table. I noticed the recording app was already open, the red dot blinking silently. She wanted evidence. She would get more than she bargained for. "You destroyed my life," she began, her voice low and venomous. "Everything I built, everything I worked for, you took it all away. And for what? Because I hurt your feelings at dinner." I said nothing. I simply watched her, my hands folded calmly on the table. "Do you have any idea what I've been through?" she continued, her volume rising. "My mother abandoned me. My brother is falling apart. I have no money, no home, nowhere to go, and you sit there like some kind of saint pretending you're the victim." Diners at nearby tables had begun to notice the commotion. A woman in pearls whispered to her husband. A young couple exchanged uncomfortable glances. I saw at least 2 phones being raised, their cameras pointed in our direction. Vanessa saw them too, and something shifted in her expression. She had wanted an audience. Now she had one. "You're pathetic," she shouted loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "A nobody without money. That's all you ever were, Walter, a walking checkbook. Everyone here can see what you really are, a bitter, lonely old man who couldn't stand watching someone else be happy. The restaurant had gone silent. Every eye was fixed on our table. Vanessa's chest heaved with exertion, her face flushed with the exhilaration of public performance. She believed she was winning. She believed she was destroying me in front of witnesses who would carry her story into the world. I waited until she paused for breath. Then I spoke, my voice so calm it seemed to come from another room entirely. Are you finished? The question landed like a slap. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed without sound. She had expected anger, defensiveness, anything she could use against me. My composure was not part of her script. You don't get to dismiss me, she hissed, not after what you've done. I haven't dismissed you, I replied evenly. I asked if you were finished, because if you are, I'd like to enjoy my water in peace. The absurdity of the statement, the sheer refusal to engage with her hysteria, pushed Vanessa past the edge of control. She slammed her palm against the table, rattling the silverware, drawing gasps from nearby diners. You ruined me, she screamed. You ruined everything. Before she could continue, a figure appeared beside our table. It was the restaurant manager, a composed man in his 50s whom I recognized from my previous visit with Jonathan. He had been present the night Vanessa first humiliated me. He had seen everything. Ma'am, he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations. I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. You're disturbing our other guests. Vanessa turned on him with fury in her eyes. Stay out of this. This is a private conversation. The manager did not retreat. Instead, he looked directly at me, then back at Vanessa. Ma'am, I was here that night, the dinner several weeks ago. I saw everything that happened and I heard everything that was said. He paused, letting the words settle, and I already sent the original security footage to this gentleman's lawyer last week, the complete unedited recording. The color drained from Vanessa's face. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. I suggest, the manager continued, that you leave quietly before this situation becomes any more uncomfortable for everyone involved. Vanessa grabbed her phone from the table, her hands shaking. As she stared at the screen, a notification appeared. I watched her expression shift from confusion to disbelief to something approaching horror. The news alert was brief but devastating. Viral video debunked original footage shows different story. The article had been shared thousands of times in the hour since its publication. The view count on the original footage was already at 100,000 and climbing. Vanessa looked up at me, her eyes wide with the realization that her narrative had just collapsed in front of the entire internet. The truth, I said quietly, always finds its audience. The internet moves faster than justice, but sometimes they arrive at the same destination. Within 24 hours of the restaurant confrontation, the original unedited video had accumulated over 500,000 views. News outlets that had initially amplified Vanessa's accusations now ran corrections and retractions. Social media accounts that had called for my arrest deleted their posts in shame. The narrative had not just shifted, it had completely reversed. I watched the transformation from the quiet of my living room, scrolling through comments that now defended me with the same ferocity they had once attacked. Strangers who had never met me declared Vanessa a gold digger, an elder abuser, a manipulator who had finally been exposed. The hashtag calling for my arrest was replaced by a new one demanding accountability for those who exploit elderly family members. The mob had found a new target, and they pursued her with the same thoughtless intensity they had once directed at me. I felt no satisfaction in watching Vanessa's destruction. The comments were cruel, often crossing lines that made me uncomfortable. People shared her personal information, her workplace, even photographs of the house she was about to lose. The punishment had become disproportionate to the crime, fueled by anonymous rage that cared nothing for nuance or context. She had done terrible things, but she was still a human being. The internet had forgotten that. Tyler called that afternoon, his voice heavy with exhaustion. He had been staying at a motel since leaving the house, unable to return to the home he had shared with Vanessa, unwilling to impose on me while he sorted through the wreckage of his marriage. Have you seen what they're saying about her online? He asked. I've seen enough, I replied. It's brutal, Dad. I know she deserves consequences, but this feels like something else, like a public execution. I understood what he meant. Vanessa had tried to destroy me through social media, and now social media was destroying her in return. The symmetry was poetic but troubling. Justice should not depend on viral outrage. The courts will handle the legal consequences, I said. The internet will move on to someone else soon enough. They always do. We talked for a few more minutes before Tyler said he needed to rest. The conversation left me unsettled, contemplating the thin line between accountability and cruelty. The call I received that evening unsettled me further. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway. Old habits from my investigation days had taught me that important information often arrived from unexpected sources. The voice on the other end was female, older, with a sharpness that reminded me of a blade wrapped in velvet. Mr. Grayson, my name is Gloria Marsh. I believe you've been looking into my family. I sat up straighter in my chair. Gloria Marsh, Vanessa's mother. The puppet master I had traced through bank records and criminal histories. The woman who had been extracting money from her daughter for years. I know who you are, I said carefully. What do you want? Straight to business. I appreciate that. She paused, and I could almost hear her calculating her next words. I'm calling because I believe we can help each other. You want to see my daughter face consequences for what she's done. I have information that will guarantee that outcome. What kind of information? Everything. Bank records she thought were hidden, conversations where she admitted to planning the fraud, details about schemes she ran before she ever met your son. Gloria's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. I have enough to put her away for years, Mr. Grayson, and I'm willing to share it with you. In exchange for what? Compensation. For my time and the risk I'm taking by coming forward. $50,000 would be appropriate, I think. A small price for this peace of mind you'd receive. I let the silence stretch between us. Gloria Marsh was offering to testify against her own daughter for money. She had spent years extracting funds from Vanessa, threatening her with exposure, forcing her to drain my accounts to meet impossible demands. And now that Vanessa was no longer useful, Gloria was prepared to profit from her destruction. Let me make sure I understand, I said slowly. You want me to pay you $50,000 to help me destroy your own daughter. I want fair compensation for valuable information. What happens to Vanessa is simply a consequence of her own choices. I tried to guide her, Mr. Grayson. I tried to teach her how to survive in a difficult world. She failed to learn those lessons. That's not my fault. The coldness in her voice was absolute. There was no maternal concern, no regret, no acknowledgement that she had played any role in shaping the woman Vanessa had become. Gloria saw her daughter as a failed investment, nothing more. No, I said. Excuse me. I said no. I don't make deals with people who sell their own children. The silence on the other end was longer this time, charged with something that might have been surprise or anger. You're making a mistake, Gloria said finally. I could make this much easier for you. I don't need easy. I need clean. And there's nothing clean about profiting from your daughter's downfall. I paused, letting my words sink in. Whatever Vanessa became, you helped create her. You taught her that manipulation was survival, that family was something to exploit rather than protect. And now you want to cash in one final time before walking away. You don't know anything about my family. I know enough. Goodbye, Mrs. Marsh. I ended the call before she could respond. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of containing my disgust. Vanessa had done terrible things, but she had learned those behaviors from someone. Now I understood exactly who that someone was. 2 days later, the legal consequences finally arrived. Jonathan called with news that the district attorney's office had reviewed our evidence and agreed to pursue criminal charges. That same afternoon, police officers knocked on Vanessa's door with a court summons. The charges were serious: financial fraud, identity theft, elder financial abuse. Each count carried significant penalties, and together they represented a maximum sentence of 5 years in state prison. The woman who had called me a walking credit card was about to discover what life looked like without any credit at all. Tyler filed for divorce the morning after the criminal charges were announced. He called me from the courthouse steps, his voice carrying a calm I had not heard since this ordeal began. The decision had not been easy, but it had been necessary. 8 years of marriage built on foundations of deception could not survive the weight of truth. It's done, he said simply. I signed the papers. She'll be served this afternoon. I asked how he was feeling, knowing the question was inadequate for the enormity of what he was experiencing. Ending a marriage is a kind of death, even when the marriage was broken beyond repair. Relieved, Tyler admitted after a long pause. And sad and angry, all at once. Is that normal? It's completely normal, I assured him. Grief doesn't follow a schedule. Take whatever time you need. He thanked me and said he would come by later that evening. There were things he needed to process alone, first walks to take, thoughts to untangle. I understood. Some journeys must be traveled without company. The confrontation between Tyler and Vanessa happened that afternoon in the house they had shared for 8 years. I was not present, but Tyler recounted every detail when he arrived at my door that night, his eyes red from crying, his hands still trembling from the emotional weight of what had transpired. Vanessa had been waiting when he returned from the courthouse. She had received the divorce papers an hour earlier and knew what was coming. But instead of the defiance Tyler expected, he found something else entirely. She was sitting on the floor of their bedroom, surrounded by old photographs, her makeup streaked with tears. She looked broken, Tyler told me. Not angry, not scheming, just broken. For the first time in their marriage, Vanessa told him the truth, all of it. She spoke about Gloria, the mother she had hidden from Tyler since before their wedding. Gloria was not simply estranged. She was a convicted con artist who had raised her children to view deception as survival. From childhood, Vanessa had been taught that trust was weakness, that vulnerability invited exploitation, that the only way to protect yourself was to control everyone around you. When Vanessa tried to escape that world by marrying Tyler, Gloria had followed. The monthly payments that had drained my accounts were not voluntary support for a struggling family. They were extortion extracted through threats and manipulation. Gloria knew secrets about Vanessa's past, things that could destroy her marriage and her reputation if revealed. She used that knowledge like a weapon, demanding money in exchange for silence. I never wanted to hurt your father, Vanessa had confessed through tears. But my mother threatened to destroy everything. She said she would tell you about Marcus, about my past, about things I did before we met. She said she would ruin me if I didn't keep paying. I had no choice. Tyler had listened in silence, letting her pour out years of hidden anguish. When she finished, he had only one response. You had a choice, Vanessa. You could have told me the truth. You could have trusted me to stand by you to help you fight her. Instead, you chose to hurt my family. You chose to steal from my father, to humiliate him, to threaten him with guardianship. Those were your choices, not your mother's. Vanessa had no answer to that. The truth, stripped of excuses, left her with nothing to hide behind. She came to my house that evening, arriving shortly before Tyler. I opened the door to find her standing on my porch, her eyes swollen, her posture collapsed into something I had never seen from her before. Humility. Mr. Grayson, she whispered. Please, I need to talk to you. I stepped aside and let her enter. She walked to the middle of my living room, then slowly sank to her knees. The gesture was so unexpected, so completely contrary to everything I knew about this woman, that I found myself frozen in place. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. For everything. For the dinner, for the lies, for the money. For making you feel like you didn't matter. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I studied her face, searching for signs of manipulation, the calculated performance I had seen so many times before. But there was nothing calculated in her expression now. There was only exhaustion and regret, the raw aftermath of a life built on deception, finally collapsing under its own weight. Vanessa, I said gently, stand up. She rose unsteadily, wiping her face with the back of her hand. I want you to listen carefully, I continued. I already forgave you. The moment I understood your pain, the prison your mother built around you, I forgave you. Holding on to anger would only poison my own peace, and I have lost too much time to bitterness already. Her eyes widened with something like hope. I raised my hand to stop it from growing. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You made choices, Vanessa, terrible choices that hurt people who had done nothing to deserve it. You will face those consequences in court. And I will not intervene. That is the price of the path you chose. She nodded slowly, accepting what I was saying, even as tears continued to fall. I understand, she whispered. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry." She turned to leave, her shoulders bent under the weight of everything she had lost. As she reached the door, I called after her. "Vanessa, one more thing." She paused without turning around. "Your mother called me yesterday. She offered to testify against you in exchange for $50,000. She said she had information that could destroy you completely." Vanessa's body went rigid. "I refused," I continued. "I don't make deals with people who sell their own children, but I thought you should know the truth about her. She was never going to protect you. She never was." Vanessa stood motionless for a long moment. Then, without a word, she opened the door and walked into the night. 3 months passed before the legal matters were finally resolved. The wheels of justice turned slowly. But they turn with a certainty that no amount of manipulation can stop. I attended every hearing, sat through every motion, watched as the truth I had gathered was presented in courts of law, where evidence mattered more than emotion. Vanessa's trial concluded on a gray Tuesday in early spring. The judge, a stern woman with decades of experience, reviewed the mountain of documentation Jonathan had compiled: bank statements showing systematic fraud, the intercepted letter proving deliberate manipulation, recordings of threats and public humiliation. The evidence was overwhelming, and Vanessa's attorney had little to work with beyond appeals for mercy. In the end, the judge delivered a sentence that balanced accountability with recognition of the circumstances that had shaped Vanessa's choices. 2 years suspended contingent on good behavior and completion of community service. $45,000 in restitution, the approximate amount she had fraudulently taken from my accounts over the years. A restraining order prohibiting any contact with me for 3 years. It was not the maximum sentence. Some might argue it was too lenient, but I found it appropriate. Vanessa would carry the weight of a criminal record for the rest of her life, a permanent reminder of the choices she had made. That was punishment enough. I had never wanted to destroy her. I had only wanted to reclaim what was mine. Gloria Marsh faced a different kind of reckoning. The investigation into her activities had expanded beyond Virginia, uncovering fraud schemes in 3 other states, stretching back over 2 decades. Federal prosecutors were building a case that would likely result in significant prison time. The puppet master, who had controlled her daughter for so long, was finally facing consequences of her own. Vanessa's brother Marcus entered a court-ordered rehabilitation program as part of a plea agreement for charges unrelated to my case. I never learned the details, and I never sought them out. Some stories belonged to other people, and his was not mine to follow. Tyler moved into an apartment less than a mile from my house. It was small, but comfortable, a fresh start in a space untainted by memories of his failed marriage. The divorce was finalized the same week as Vanessa's sentencing, ending 8 years of a union that should never have survived as long as it did. We spent weekends together, my son and I, rebuilding the relationship that Vanessa had worked so hard to destroy. We cooked meals in my kitchen, watched baseball games on the old television Maggie had always complained about, took long walks through the neighborhood where Tyler had grown up. The conversations were not always easy. There were years of distance to bridge misunderstandings, to untangle wounds that needed time to heal. But we were trying, and that was enough. Eleanor Hill became a regular presence in my life as well. She visited several times a week, sometimes with casseroles. She insisted I needed, sometimes with nothing but her company and her memories of Maggie. We spent hours in the garden together, tending the roses and hydrangeas that my wife had planted decades ago. Eleanor knew their names, their histories, the particular care each one required. She had been listening when Maggie talked about them, storing away knowledge that she now shared with me like a gift I had not known I was waiting to receive. One afternoon, as we knelt in the soil pulling weeds, Eleanor told me something that stopped my hands mid-motion. She knew this would happen, not the specifics, but the shape of it. Maggie always said you were too trusting, too willing to believe the best in people. She loved that about you, but she worried about it too. I sat back on my heels and looked at the garden around us, the blooms that Maggie had nurtured now thriving under new care. She prepared for everything, I said quietly. The trust, the letter, even you. She spent her final months making sure I would be protected. Eleanor smiled, her eyes glistening. That's who she was. Always thinking ahead, always taking care of the people she loved. She made me promise to watch over you, and I'm glad I kept that promise. That evening, after Eleanor had gone home and Tyler had returned to his apartment, I sat alone in the living room with Maggie's letter in my hands. I had read it dozens of times over the past months, drawing strength from her words whenever the battle grew exhausting, but tonight felt different. Tonight I read it not for strength, but for closure. Her handwriting filled the pages steady and sure, the script of a woman who had faced her own mortality with grace. I traced the lines with my fingertip, hearing her voice in every word, feeling her presence in the room as clearly as if she were sitting beside me. The final paragraph was the one I returned to most often. You will survive this because you are the strongest man I've ever known. And when it's over, you will find peace. Not because you won, but because you stayed true to who you are. That is your victory, Walter. That is what I always loved most about you. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a frame I had purchased earlier that week. The frame was simple, elegant, exactly what Maggie would have chosen. I set it on the mantel beside our wedding photograph, two artifacts from a life we had built together now standing guard over the home we had shared. The sunset was painting the garden in shades of gold and amber when I walked to the window. The roses were in full bloom, their petals catching the light like small flames. Somewhere in the distance, a bird was singing the last song of the day. I looked at Maggie's photograph, her smile frozen in a moment of perfect happiness, and spoke to her the way I had spoken to her every day since she left. If they had treated me like family, I said softly, they would still have one. But I found something better, Maggie. I found peace. The garden glowed in the fading light, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt whole. Every story of betrayal is also a story about what we choose to protect. Walter Grayson did not win because he had more money or better lawyers. He won because he refused to let cruelty change who he was. When Vanessa called him a walking credit card, she expected him to crumble. Instead, he stood up, walked out with dignity, and began the quiet work of reclaiming his life. His victory was not loud or vengeful. It was patient, methodical, and rooted in the values his wife Maggie had always seen in him. This story reminds us that strength does not require shouting. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remain calm when others expect us to break. Walter's journey teaches us that forgiveness and accountability can coexist, that understanding someone's pain does not mean excusing their choices, and that peace is something we build through the decisions we make every single day. If this story moved you, we would love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who later regretted it? Have you faced a moment where you had to choose between conflict and dignity? What would you have done in Walter's position? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might be the one that helps someone else find the courage to stand up for themselves. If you enjoyed this journey of justice, family, and redemption, make sure to subscribe for more stories that remind us why integrity always wins in the end. And remember, the people who treat you like family are not always the ones who share your blood. Sometimes they are the ones who show up when you need them most.
Did you enjoy my story? What a journey it has been. I truly wonder, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have chosen silence to keep the peace, or would you have done what I did to reclaim your dignity? Let's meet in the comments below. I'm so curious to hear your thoughts. I'm reading every single one. Which city are you listening from tonight? If my story resonated with you, you can support me and help me bring more stories like this to the world by sending a super thanks. Your sweet support means the world to me and allows me to continue this journey with all of you. On the screen now, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend you watch next. There are so many more on my channel, each with its own lessons and triumphs. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. Thank you for being here with me. Until the next story, with love and respect.